And you'll see that this afternoon we're going to be having a look at improving outcomes for multilingual learners through a language-based pedagogy. So we'll talk about how we can improve those outcomes. We're going to look at a language-based pedagogy as a crucial component of a full education for multilingual learners. At the same time, it's also extremely beneficial for all learners. So really it's a win-win. We don't have to have separate curriculum and separate lesson plans for our EAL learners, because what we do for them will be really supportive of all learners. And at the heart of this pedagogy is the understanding that literacy skills across the whole curriculum need to be explicitly taught. So it's not just the job of the English teacher or the EAL teacher, but it's the job of every teacher. So this approach, this pedagogical approach, helps teachers to see and address the language and literacy demands of their subject areas. So you'll see that we have examples from different subject areas. Okay, so we're going to put up on the screen some teacher comments about less successful writing in geography and history. Let's have a look and see if you sometimes think these kind of things yourselves about the writing that your students are doing. So we see that as a teacher, reading this kind of writing is obviously deeply frustrating. It takes longer to mark and even longer to work out what to do about it. So a language-based pedagogy prepares students for writing rather than repairing their writing later on. So it's a nice little catchphrase, let's prepare rather than repair. It's a nightmare because so many of my students just write like they talk. Many colleagues of mine have said it over the years, and I imagine many of yours have too. So let's consider how we as educators can support students to write in a way that is expected in the schooling context. As students begin schooling, they'll be drawing on their common sense understandings and experiences of the world, of their close and immediate world. As they move through school, they'll be expected increasingly to read, write, listen, and speak about content that deals with more technical, specialised, and abstract curriculum knowledge. For students to become successful in education, they need to understand how to make effective and appropriate language choices. And the question for today is, how do we move students from the informal, spoken language of everyday life to the more formal academic language that's required of them in school? Linguist Michael Halliday understood these increasing demands as students make their way through the education system, and he conceptualized this as a continuum from spoken language at the left to written language at the right. So this understanding underpins the language-based pedagogy. Let's have a look at some texts that were written in response to the task on the screen along the continuum. So we've got a task there. What were the factors that led to William's victory at the Battle of Hastings? On the left, we've got, he won because he was good at getting stuff prepared and also at leading his men, and he was actually quite lucky too. In the middle there, we've got, I'm going to give 3 reasons why William won the Battle of Hastings in 1066. He was well prepared, good at leading his army, and lucky. And on the right, we have good preparation, good leadership, and good luck were the key factors that led to William's victory at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Now, for most teachers, we can look at those 3 texts and have an understanding that this one is the one on the right is much more the type of text that's expected at school, the type of text that is appreciated at school, expected at school, and which receives a higher mark at school. So we're going to look more deeply into the language choices that make those texts different, and that makes the one on the left more like a spoken text and the one on the right more like a written text. Before that, we need to just look at the register continuum. A language-based pedagogy, like we're talking about, is underpinned by the functional model of language. And this model demonstrates that students need to be able to choose the appropriate language for the context. This can be presented as a continuum, and it's called the register continuum, as you can see on the screen. So when we're thinking about what the topic is or the field, we need to be able to move from everyday concrete language on the left to the technical and abstract written language that's required at school, that's over on the right-hand side. The next variable, the variable called tenor, it's about who is involved in the communication. And it moves from very informal, personal and novice scenarios on the left there to interacting in a more formal, impersonal and informed or expert way on the right. And finally, mode is all about how we're communicating. Mode shifts from very spoken language in the here and now, and that might include using accompanying actions or gesture, to written language that's much more organised, it's generalised, and it's where the written text has to do all of the work. So now we've got that under our belt, let's have a look at this history task that we looked at a little bit earlier. So there we've got our task. The genre is a factorial explanation. Genre is also referred to as text type in schools. So we've got the genre identified clearly. So this is a factorial explanation, trying to explain a set of factors that led to William's victory at Hastings. Now, each genre or text type has a set of language features that distinguish it from other genres or text types. So as an example, a narrative is quite different to an explanation, which is quite different to a letter. Now we're going to begin by looking at the field or the content, and we can have a look at some language choices there. So the student has used the word because he's trying to create a cause and effect link. We move across to the middle, the student refers to reason. So he's changed this linking word or this conjunction into a noun. When we move further across to the right, we've now got factors, which is the technical historical term that we want here, the key factors. So this is what we call nominalized language. We shifted from words that aren't nouns on the left-hand side, in this case because, which is a conjunction, to a noun of reasons, and then further across to factors, which is much more the academic vocabulary that we typically see on the right-hand side of the continuum, and that's expected in an academic context. So next we've got good at getting stuff organised on the left, which is changed then to well prepared in the middle. And then it shifts again to change this to a noun group, good preparation. Finally, we look at good at getting his men to do what he wanted on the left, over to good at leading his army, and then finally to the nominalization of good leadership. And now we can see he was actually quite lucky, which becomes had quite a bit of luck. And finally, on the right-hand side of the continuum, this is nominalized into good fortune. And another language resource that we've used here, we can see the word one in the first two texts, which is then nominalized to victory. So we've got this really clear shift in terms of the vocabulary. And this shift from everyday spoken language to technical written language can be explicitly taught and is the foundation of a language-based pedagogy. The activity that we've done there is also incredibly valuable for our students because we've made the language choices visible. We've pointed out what makes one text further to the right on the register continuum, and in this case, a more desirable text in terms of an academic context. And we've been able to show the students that and give them a record of that by using colour, making it visible. So if we look at tenor, or how the writer interacts with the audience, we can see at the beginning, he's using very informal language like stuff and quite. When he moves across, he's much stilted. He's now not using and I think, but he's still talking in the first person. And on the right-hand side, he's taken out the personal language altogether, and he's arrived at a more technical and formal piece of writing. And now we turn to mode. Remember, we looked at 3 different variables on that register continuum of field, tenor, and mode. And mode is the way the text is structured. So we're going to see that this student begins with the first text by foregrounding people like I and he. As he moves across to the middle, he's still focusing on people with I, he, and William. In contrast, in the third text, now the focus is on historical concepts, good preparation, good leadership, and good focus. So if we can teach our students how to control the key features of the language and how it moves from everyday informal spoken mode to the technical written mode, then we've given them a really incredibly powerful tool. So we're going to look at some examples of how we can do that in the classroom. Let's look at the register continuum in science. Here's an example of how a Year 9 teacher named Alistair Clark approached the need to write in a more technical and formal way in science. So first, the teacher asked what happens to the resultant force when acceleration increases. And a student responded with, it goes up. And you can see that on the left-hand side of the screen. The teacher took that opportunity to talk about the register continuum, so he drew it quickly on the board. There it is there, going from left to right. We can see it there. He also wrote the characteristics of the spoken and written language on the board. So we can see that here on the left, he's written very quickly, spoken, informal, non-academic, and written, formal and academic over here. So he's really helping our students who need to see it on the board as well as hear it. So then he and the students jointly constructed the texts at the middle and the right of the register continuum. And you can see those there. In the middle there, the bigger the resultant force, the bigger the acceleration. And further on to the right, acceleration is directly proportional to the resultant force. Note that the language and the content here are being taught together. Teacher was really opportunistic. The teacher thought, all right, we need the content, but in order to express the content, we need to understand the language. We can see here the language that he's added onto the board to work with the students in their understanding of the content and their understanding of how to express that with language. I've got a quote there on the screen that I'll let you read to yourselves. So I can really relate to quotes like this as a student in the 1970s, as well as a teacher. So not only does this approach give the tools of language to students, it gives them to teachers too. So the second quote there is, previously, the language would be around, the kids have got to write more formally, and that was about it, full stop. And now the kids have got to write more formally by doing X, Y, and Z. We've given them the tools. So now we've looked at a science example, we're going to have a look at a history example, and this is from Matthew Tomlinson, who's the head of history at the Lycée International in Paris. Now he's teaching his students how to structure their responses to a task, and he prepared his own model for this lesson. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to have models of the text that your students are expected to write. So we've got his title and then an introduction. And in that introduction, he's used red font to set up the way the text is going to unfold in a really concise and clear way. So he's going to have 3 paragraphs there. And we've got 3 red sections in the introductory paragraph. 1 is Britain and France. 2 is an era of aggressive militarism. And 3 is bankruptcy of world order. So he's taking information from the opening paragraph and showing students how they can structure their response in a really guided and structured way. So keeping on looking at this text, he also uses that text to show students how to use topic sentences to foreground their arguments and to link to their introduction. So I want you to take note of the visual element of the arrows and the colours. They're really deliberate and valuable tools. He also shows them what should be included in each elaboration. So he lists cause and effect sequences. So we understand from this that he will explicitly teach us how to teach students how to use the language resources of cause and effect. He'll also teach them how to include quotes, examples, and statistics. And then he looked at how to use a graphic organizer with his students. So this has made the whole structure visible to his students in a really, again, a clear and concise way. It provides a framework for the elements that he's going to teach in preparation for the writing task as well. So not only does it help his students, it also helps him as a teacher to give him a guide as to where to go and what needs to be taught. I'll give you a moment just to read that on the screen before we click. So now we've got this wonderful image, and we've got an analogy from John Polius about learning language in the context of making disciplinary meanings rather than as separate bolt-on bits. So when we hear teachers say, I haven't got time to teach language, I've got too much content to teach, language is being considered as a bolt-on bit, but it really can't be. In order for a car to function properly, all the bits have to work together, and language is the same. We can see language as the heart of communication of disciplinary knowledge in the curriculum, where all the parts work together to make the vehicle function well. So we have to see content and language as being linked, and as such, they complement one another. This image also makes me think about terminology, the terminology of language. If I were to instruct an apprentice mechanic to put all of these parts together to make it work as a roadworthy vehicle, I couldn't just say, well, look at that Corolla over there. You've got all the parts, just put it together so it functions properly. It wouldn't work. I'd need to teach them the names of the parts and how those parts work together. And I'd need to explicitly teach an apprentice mechanic how to put that together properly. And I could only do that by being able to talk about the parts in terms of their names. So it makes us consider the value of knowing the terminology of language. For example, if we can talk about language, then we're much more able to teach it, to give effective feedback to our students, and then to discuss their drafts in a way that they can make sense of. So, for example, if students need to express cause and effect, we need to teach them the terminology of cause and effect language, just like we teach them the terminology of the content. This quote from Michael Halliday really resonates with me. This is our goal. If knowledge is constructed in language, then those who want to open up access to such knowledge not only must themselves understand, but must also enable learners to understand how it is that language does its work. And this is our goal. It's to give teachers knowledge about language and the tools to impart this knowledge to the students within their subject area through a very explicit language pedagogy. So this pedagogy of really being explicit about language is focused around a teaching and learning cycle. And it's used at the level of activity, the level of lesson, and the level of unit of work, and also curriculum design. There are 4 components: setting the context, modeling and deconstruction, guided or joint construction, and independent construction. Each one of those 4 components is an integral part of building students' meaning-making resources and building their meaning-making capacity. So their ability to make meaning of things that they read and their ability to make meaning when they're composing texts. And child development research tells us that this is the way that we learn everything, from tying our shoelaces to writing an academic paper at university. So now we're going to have a look at the system of choices in language. So if students are writing a story about a journey, they would have many choices in terms of the language that they could use. However, in science, if they need to write an explanation of, say, how nitrogen oxides are made in a car engine, well, there are fewer choices because there are certain ways that scientists need to explain things. This type of task from history would have more choices than the science task, but not as many as the English narrative task, because they've got a very specific job to do, and that is to describe key features of something. Then we look at a task from maths. The choices are extremely limited because there's a very prescribed way of expressing those understandings within that content or that curriculum area. So this is where we need to consider how to scaffold our students to make the correct linguistic choices for the task that they've been asked to do. It's also here that we realise that's the role of the subject teacher, not the English teacher or the EAL teacher, to teach the language of the curriculum. The science teacher is the one who knows best how to compose a scientific text. So it's the science teacher who should be the one to teach how to compose a scientific text. There's another quote for us. So using such approaches has really clarified my teaching practice. I see what pupils will need to understand in terms of language. Language will carry the information that pupils need to convey in their responses. You can't disconnect the language and the subject content. Now, let's have a look at the success of this kind of pedagogy. So this graph is from an intensive language school in Australia that took this pedagogy on and they saw great success. An intensive language school is a school that caters for students who are newly arrived in Australia and have just begun to learn English, and they can attend for up to 18 months before they attend a mainstream school. As measured by this tool, language and literacy levels, mainstream students would be expected to advance 1 level per year. The first two columns of this figure indicate that students at the school were able to show growth just over 1.2 in a single term. A single term here is just generally about 10 weeks. So if we extrapolate that over the whole year, this means that on average, students were improving around 5 levels per year in 2017 and more than 6 levels the following year as that pedagogy took hold. So that's pretty impressive if we think back to the fact that mainstream students would be expected to advance 1 level per year. We've got another graph there. Shows the same school's data, but now for primary age students. So it shows the growth in the language and literacy levels over 6 months of school or 2 terms, and we can see consistent growth there simply by having a pedagogy that was focused on the explicit teaching of language. We've got a couple of quotes there, and I'll let you read them from the screen. The one on the left is really interesting because I've spoken to a lot of teachers over the years who say, yeah, I can write really well, but I can't explain what I do to my students. And this is the solution to that. We've got a video here to show. This is how one school has implemented a language-based pedagogy. It's going to show teachers talking about their experience and some students working in class as an example of what we're talking about. They recently presented it at the Educational Collaborative for International Schools conference, and they gave us permission to share it with you, so I hope you enjoy it. It exemplifies why we promote the whole school implementation model through the Train the Trainer model.
Because the point of this exercise is for you to write a research project where you are not saying things like, I think that, oh yeah, it looks kind of. You are going to use the words such as the data suggests, the evidence shows. All right, I'm going to give you 5 minutes to compare what you have written down with your desk partner, and then I'm going to read it again, and then we will discuss. Okay. After plotting the points and drawing the line of best fit, the evidence suggests that the relationship between the variables is a negative linear correlation.
The information suggests a negative correlation. After plotting the points and doing the line of best fit, we can see that the graph has a negative linear correlation.
And what is it? How much angle is this? Angle? And would you agree that this we call, have you heard of the word perpendicular? Yeah. It makes a 90-degree angle. Are we perpendicular? Yeah. Focus more on how sentences are written, how language can be communicated, how sentences are structured, which I thought never really part of science teaching, but it is essential in their success.
How I need to be more careful about using visuals, putting text on the board that students can see that goes with the language. And this applies to all students and whatever level of proficiency.
I also enjoyed the opportunity to try different teaching methods, then feed back to the group with some really tangible evidence of, was this valuable to our students or not?
Okay, so we've got a quote here from Brian Dare and John Polius about adopting a language-based pedagogy. And I think it's a great quote to finish on. So let's read it and then we'll have some time for questions and answers. On so many occasions over the years, we have seen teachers thrilled and motivated by seeing for themselves the benefits to be enjoyed by both teacher and students when learning about language becomes central to teaching and learning.